Okay. I've hit record there now as well. Great, so just looking at the objectives for the training overall then as well. So essentially it's to look at how we design effective digital campaigns for our work. So I think an important part of that is just analyzing how we're currently performing, you know, and taking stock and trying to think about what is working well and how can we build on that progress moving forward. You know, because often I find in our work we get very kind of busy and caught up in what we're doing. So I think, you know, where we can, it's important just to take that time and create that space to reflect on, you know, just the progress and looking at, okay, well, how do we actually try to build on this moving forward? So that's very much kind of like the objective for this training. And then looking at, you know, what does effective kind of like planning and social media monitoring and listening look like moving forward as well. So for any upcoming campaigns and activities, being able to really plan effectively around that to get the most out of digital and social media for those campaigns, for those activities. And then also looking at creating digital content as well. You know, a lot of the backbone of a lot of this work on digital and social media comes down to the content and to our messaging as well, you know. So looking at tips and tools for either free or low budget tools for creating some of that engaging content to really help to tell our stories in the best ways. And then also measuring our success as well, which I think is really important. So it's kind of a full circle. So looking at kind of like the planning, the implementation, but also doing the review as well, you know, and being able to have a strategic kind of like lens on, okay, well, you know, how effective was this on social media? So when we're allocating all of these resources, what's the return? What are we getting in return for that? So being able to set those goals, set those targets, and monitor and adapt as we kind of embark on these campaigns. Okay. So first of all, I think that this is a useful exercise to do at the outset of the training as well, okay? So this is very much like linked to that kind of trying to analyze our current performance. So what I have here is what I call like a social media assessment, right? So breaking down what is kind of like a bit of a social media journey into 4 different stages, okay? So what I'm going to do is go through each of the different stages, and then I'm going to actually put you into different breakout rooms where you can discuss amongst your smaller groups where you might be in that journey. Okay. And I think what this helps to do is just to take stock and reflect on where we are, but also you'll hopefully be able to identify where we might like to get to at the end of this training session as well. So identify some areas for improvement as well. Okay. So the first stage in that journey is that it's kind of like what I call the crawl stage. So that's where it's very kind of like inconsistent posting on your social media channels primarily. So it's kind of like, you know, when you say you have an event or something and it's like, oh, did we put something up on social media about that? But, you know, so it's more of an ad hoc approach, and there's less of a plan or a strategy behind what you're trying to achieve. And often in this stage as well, the role is not really supported in that maybe it's not somebody's dedicated role, or you don't have the time or the resources to be able to dedicate to this. The next stage in that journey then is the walk stage. So this is where, you know, you do have some outlined objectives. You have an idea of how you want to use social media as part of your campaigns. It may be part of somebody's job, or there is kind of some resources allocated to that, but you're not measuring your analytics. Let Mayan is just trying to get back in there. But you're not measuring your analytics, so you don't really have a good sense of, you know, what is working well, what content, what messages are resonating well with audiences. So I think being able to measure that is really important. But again, it might lack the kind of the time, the effort, and the energy that it really requires. The third step in this journey then is the run stage. This is where you have consistent output across your social media channels. You know kind of who you're trying to target as well, so your key target audiences. You're using kind of like different content on different platforms in order to be able to engage those audiences. But you feel like, you know, you are putting all of this effort and resources behind it, but it's lacking that real engagement that you're hoping for or expecting. From being able to allocate those resources to it. Then at the other end of the journey then is the fly stage. So I think this is when, you know, you do have a robust say plan or strategy in place, and you do feel like that your content gets good engagement from your target audiences. It is somebody's kind of like dedicated role, or you're able to allocate like resources to it, be kind of like that time or even kind of budget as well around kind of creating content, videos, graphics, whatever that might be. And also I think the gold standard for a lot of the work that we be involved in as well is when we have, you know, ambassadors on social media who are sending our message to their networks on their platforms as well. So really helping to get out there further and further as well. Okay, so hopefully you might be that will resonate with some of you, and you may be able to see where you are along that journey. You know, and I've done this exercise before, and it might be a case that, you know, you don't necessarily fall within one specific category. So you might be, oh, I'm somewhere between walk and run. We're doing this, but we're not doing this. So that's very much the idea of this, is just to kind of like take a look at, you know, what you are doing well, but then maybe hopefully be able to identify some of those things that you could be looking at implementing over the next 3, 6, 12 months in order to help move you along in that journey. Does that, hopefully that's okay. So I do think it would be useful maybe just to kind of put you into breakout rooms now, and then just discuss this a little bit, you know. So even just, again, taking the time, having a little bit of a discussion about where you're currently at now, how you feel, you know, that you are using social media as part of your work. What are the challenges that you face, you know, and maybe a little bit, what are you hoping to learn from this, these sessions across this week? Is that okay? Yes, somebody, and then just somebody is asking, will I be providing the slides at the end of the session? I will be providing a copy of the slides, so you don't need to be furiously taking notes. Okay, so just bear with me now for just 1 minute while I'm just going to pop you into different breakout rooms. Okay.
We lost your sound.
My sound?
Yes, let's start to make some noises.
Okay, can you hear me okay now?
Now it's okay, yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to break you into 5 different breakout rooms with 5 participants in each room, okay? And then so we're just going to take about 15 minutes on this. So looking at, you know, how you're currently performing on social media, what you think is working well, what challenges do you face, and kind of what are you hoping to learn or take from the sessions this week. And as you're discussing that in your groups, I'll pop into the different breakout rooms and see how you're getting on. Okay? Now, you should be invited to your rooms. So MJ and Carolina.
Where do I see it?
So it should have popped up on your screen there to say you were invited. I can move you to the room. Hold on one second now.
I haven't seen anything.
Should be able. So I should be able to move you to it now. 1 second. No, not joined. No. So did like a box pop up on your screen saying join breakout room? No.
Nothing.
Let me see if I can move you to another room. Does anything come up now?
Nothing.
I don't know why. Oh, I don't know why that is. Oh, no. No.
I can come inside again. Maybe it will work then.
I'm not sure. It's still nothing, no?
No.
Maybe if you want to try and leave and come back.
Yeah, I'll try.
So I'm just going to try and assign you to another room now.
All right.
So.
Oh yeah.
Okay, thanks. MJ, are you there? Is it working for you? No. Okay.
Oh, we're back. Wait, this is the same people.
Yeah.
We're all closing now. Don't worry,
Okay.
the
Whoa.
people should be rejoining.
Oh, technology.
Did you guys find that useful? Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
I think we have mostly everyone back into the main room now. Okay, yeah, so hopefully you found that discussion useful, even just to getting the creative juices and thinking flowing, and hearing about what work your colleagues are doing, and maybe some common challenges that you are facing, but hopefully also just to guide your thinking for the rest of the sessions as well, and start thinking what you'd like to kind of take from this as well. Okay. So now kind of like moving into thinking about kind of like digital and social media strategies for progressive campaigning, but also to get the most use out of these platforms as well. So what does that look like? Excuse me. So just setting some context on that, you know, the internet, digital, social media. Oh, have I shared my screen? Oh, sorry, 1 second. That would be
Still
handy.
not.
Oh, sorry. Now, all good? Cool.
Yes, not yet.
Yeah.
So like the internet, digital, social media, you know, it's fundamentally kind of changed how we go about our lives, how we go about our business, you know, and often you hear of like this term digital transformation, you know, and sometimes it's often more commonly associated with like the commercial and the corporate world, but like, you know, the NGO sector, the campaigning sector, very much kind of undergoing its own digital transformation as well, you know, and certainly in the context of COVID-19 as well, you know, like the speed at which kind of like organizations are adapting to the evolving digital environment, you know, that has really accelerated. So, you know, I think as a case of in the past, it was kind of like, you know, a little bit of digital, a little bit of social media, you know, but now it's almost like we have to just fully embrace these platforms and the future, I suppose, you know, because I do, at the end of the day, I do think that digital and social media, they do really allow us to become better communicators, better organizers, and better campaigners, you know. And I just see them as, you know, another tool in our arsenal, and that's where you'll probably hear me referring to them as tools a lot over this session, because that's how I see them. Like even myself, you know, like I don't see myself as necessarily like a digital or social media expert. I see myself first and foremost as a campaigner. But like these platforms are my kind of like tools of choice, you know, so how do we use them in the most effective ways? And also I just think it'd be useful just to kind of like look at this for some context as well. So this is a survey that's produced every year. It's called the NGO Global Technology Survey. So it's just looking at how NGOs across the world are using new technologies as part of their work. So just some of the findings from the most recent one of those. So this is from the 2019 one. So over, let's see there, 5,721 NGOs from 160 different countries around the world. You can see kind of a breakdown there of where they're based, but also the size of the organization. And just looking at some of the stats from that. So 90%, the vast majority of the global NGOs regularly use social media to engage their supporters and their donors. So that's really positive. You know, a lot of them do have an active presence on the platform. And they, like, again, the vast majority agree that it's effective for online brand awareness, for recruiting event attendees, for creating social change, which is the business that we're in, for recruiting volunteers, and 75%, so 2/3 agree that that it's effective for inspiring people to take action. And you know, and for me, this is kind of like the crux of much of the work that I do. It definitely is around how we use these as tools to inspire action and create change. You know, so in the past, like there's the criticism around kind of like social media primarily is that it's just slacktivism or clicktivism, you know, and especially around kind of like mobilizing and organizing. It's not the same as kind of actually that real offline action, you know, and I think that kind of view tends to be a bit short-sighted, you know, and instead of thinking it that way, it's more like, okay, well, how do we use these to drive and facilitate that offline action? So yes, you know, we want to we want to use it for brand awareness, for communicating, spreading our message, but we also want to use it to mobilize and to organize and to inspire and drive that action as well. Okay. But again, like, whilst these stats are very encouraging, the fact that the majority are active, are present, and do agree that it is effective, when we drill a little bit deeper, just 44% of those respondents say that they have a written social media strategy. You know, so I think that there's a bit of a disconnect here. So whilst you might have an active presence, you know, I think without having a kind of a plan or a strategy in place, that's when it can kind of tend to fall through the cracks a little bit, you know. And at the same time, only 42% have an editorial calendar or content calendar in place. You know, so I totally understand a lot of the time when I'm working with kind of like NGOs and campaigners and activists, like this is one of 100 jobs that people are doing. You know, we're all stretched, we're all busy. You know, but I feel like when it comes to this type of work, you know, when we're able to kind of like effectively plan and manage it, it takes out a lot of the resourcing that is required in order to be effective. So having a content calendar in place. So if you're running a specific, you know, campaign or something that's coming up, if you have a content calendar in place for that, and you're able to schedule, like plan ahead as to what's coming down the line, what proactive messaging you want to be communicating to your audiences, and then when you can kind of like schedule that to go out, it takes out a lot of the resourcing that is required. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And then on just 27% have a system in place to track and report on return on investment. So this is very much around like the measuring, the analytics piece as well, which I think is really, really important. And I think we will take a closer look at how to do that and why it's important to do that as well. Okay, so I suppose what I wanted to try and convey here was that, yeah, look, we might be all on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever that might be, but this is more about actually the strategy behind it, and what are we trying to achieve, and how do we go about and do that. Okay, so for that, I've come up with this kind of process. There's kind of 7 questions that I suppose we should be asking ourselves when thinking about or designing a digital campaign. So I think just at the outset, there's a couple of things that I think are really important. One is kind of having that recognition that, yes, you know, that these are important tools, you know, in our arsenal as campaigners and as activists, and how they can benefit our campaigns, our organizations, our movements. The second then is being able to actually recognize as well that this requires resourcing. You know, you need to be able to dedicate kind of like time, but also budget kind of like to this as well. So creating content, having the personnel, all of that, you know, so it's kind of matching the resources with the expectations. So you might have like great expectations for how you want to use these platforms, but if you're not able to properly resource it, you know, it's going to be very difficult for you to achieve that. So having the recognition, allocating the resources behind it, and then, you know, I think you will start to realize all of the benefits that this can have. So then these are the kind of the 7 questions that I have, or the 7 steps in designing those strategies for inspiring action and creating change. And we'll go through each of these now in a little bit more detail. And just also to say, so, you know, I'm going to take you through all of these now, and then we're going to do we're going to look at a bit of case study from the Yes Equality referendum. So looking at, I suppose, this process in practice. And then what we'll be doing is, again, breaking out into groups, and we'll be looking at these questions again, and in your groups, and thinking about the work that you're involved in within your organizations, but also as say part of like the broader movement and within YouthRise. What would an effective kind of like digital strategy look like for that? Okay, so within your groups, you'll be trying to answer these questions and do some thinking around that. Okay, so the first one then, I think it's really, really important at the outset being able to think about and concretely kind of state what your aims and your objectives are. What are you trying to achieve? You know, this is really going to influence the rest of the process. You know, so, and I think thinking broader as well. So you know, a lot of you from the introductions I hear like are working in kind of like as in communications roles as well. So you might have a communication strategy, or you'll have an overall kind of like campaign strategy or an organizational strategy. So trying to think about how you can use digital and social media to complement and support that. Okay, so no, I wouldn't necessarily say advocate for creating a standalone digital strategy that sits out over here, but it has to be very much kind of like fully integrated within the rest of the work that you are doing. So how can you use these tools to help to support and amplify that work? So thinking forward to, like, you know, the next 6, 12 months, what are the priorities? You know, what are the events? What are the different activities, initiatives that are coming up? And then trying to kind of like plan around those. So, you know, you might be, I've just a couple of examples here, but you might be looking to promote and amplify your content, obviously, reach new supporters, but also to mobilize your current supporters to take action as well, which might be really important. And then also engaging with other stakeholders. So it might be other organizations within the sector, or, you know, in your own kind of countries, that might be local media, elected representatives, whatever that might be. Okay, and I suppose that feeds into the next stage in the process as well, which is also crucially important, but being able to clearly identify and define who your target audiences are, because like engaging different groups online does require different messages on different platforms as well. So it's about thinking about who those target audiences are, but also being able to prioritize them as well, you know. So as we're thinking about kind of like our resourcing, our messaging, you know, so if we're saying, you know, like younger people, they're our primary target audience. So that's going to have an influence on what platform we're going to be most active on, and then what the content looks like in order to be able to engage that audience as well. Because how you kind of speak to and try and mobilize younger people is going to be very different from, like, say, the types of messages that are going to be put out there to try and influence other stakeholder groups. Okay. And I think it is important to prioritize them as well, so we're not kind of spreading ourselves too thinly, and it is matched to those aims and objectives that we have set as well. And I've just kind of like mentioned there as well about thinking, like actually trying to come up with personas around kind of like the different target audiences as well, you know. So, you know, what age group are they in, where are they based, what are they interested in? And this also kind of like will come into play if we're thinking about kind of like social media advertising as well, which we'll talk a little bit about. But because you can clearly define and target audiences through social media advertising, you know, based on these demographics, based on their interests, so you can ensure that your message gets in front of those people. So the clearer that you are in who the audiences are, the more kind of like effective your social media ads strategy is going to be as well. So once you have defined your target audiences, then, like, you know, framing and messaging is so important, you know, and that, because that, I think that really determines a person's decision to engage, especially when we're thinking about trying to bring in new supporters and new audiences, and getting them on board with our message. Like the framing is crucial here. And so it's about, like, at the outset, this is kind of like the format that I try and work through when I'm designing kind of like content for social media, but also thinking through kind of like just the messaging as well. So at the first and foremost, you need to be able to articulate the issue in a compelling and authentic way, and in a way that appeals to people's values. Okay, so this is important, because even if a person is not directly affected, you know, but they need to be able to still connect with the issue. Okay, so how can you convey that message to audiences in the most kind of like authentic and compelling way, in order for them to be able to connect to it. And I think that that's often done through kind of like values-based messaging. And then also, I think, you know, it's really important to try and kind of like within this work, try and show people how things can improve as well, you know, and then maybe like what you're doing to help improve that. And then also maybe what they can do to help to support the work that you're doing for that as well, you know. So like it's going to be very difficult to always get that into you know, to your post or your content, but if that's kind of like the format that you're trying to think of through your communications work, I do think it can be very beneficial and impactful when trying to bring in those new audiences. excuse me. So, okay, so we have our aims and our objectives. We've outlined our target audiences. We know what we're going to say to them. Yeah, and then we just need to be thinking about what is the best platforms to be using, you know, in order to be able to do that. So again, you know, if we are thinking about young people primarily, and that's our primary target audience, well, then it makes most sense that, you know, we focus our efforts on, say, Instagram, because like that's where they are most active at the moment, and then, you know, that will also then influence on what the content is going to look like. So just kind of like on the platforms themselves, like, and this, it does differ a little bit, kind of like in different contexts, but by and large, Facebook is still the biggest player in the game. You know, it still has the largest available kind of like reach and audience across demographics, but certainly it's not growing at the same rate as it once was, and it's kind of a bit stagnant, and it's even kind of like losing a little bit of kind of momentum. But it still does have the largest one, and as I said, like across demographics. Then, you know, if Facebook is kind of going like this, Instagram is going like this. You know, it really is kind of like booming, and whilst they even in like that's kind of continuously changing. So it would have been primarily younger audiences who are most active there now, but that's slowly starting to change. And then also, you know, we're seeing the introduction of TikTok, and that's again, that's skewing a little bit younger now even, but that's kind of the way these platforms always tend to work. It's the digitally natives, the younger audiences that go there first, and then slowly kind of like other audiences start to migrate to these platforms as well. And then Twitter. Twitter is still very kind of like, I suppose, influential in a lot of this work as well, because if we're thinking of those other stakeholder groups, they're most active on Twitter. So it's a great platform for us to be able to, I think, really kind of like tell our story, and, you know, all the kind of like the work that we are doing. So it's more profiling the work in the organization through Twitter and trying to engage with those. And also, like, if thinking about holding power to account, like those types of stakeholders, they're most active on Twitter as well. So if they are up there in your list of priority target audiences, thinking about how you engage with them on that platform as well. And I also, like, you know, I would also like to kind of use that, or thinking about our presence on these platforms as well, and thinking about the resourcing element, you know. So often I get asked the question, you know, like, what's the next new platform now? You know, like TikTok, should we be on TikTok? How are we using TikTok? But it's more like, okay, rather than say rushing to the next new one, like, I think it is important to look at like where you're currently active as well, and are you getting the most out of those platforms? And I think it's about kind of like focusing your effort and your resources there first, you know, and trying to match that to the rest of your strategy in terms of, you know, your target. So, you know, if you're primarily trying to target like younger audience, it's you know, it's not about focusing all your time on Twitter, because that's not really where you're going to reach them all and bring in new audiences. So it might be just shifting tact a little bit, rather than trying to be very active on all different platforms. And again, kind of spreading resources too thinly then as a result, okay? So just being a little bit more kind of conscious and strategic about your choice of platform and how it relates to those other aspects. So the aims and objectives you're set and the target audiences. Hopefully all of this is making sense. And then like this very much then influences like your content strategy. As I mentioned at the outset as well, often like the content is the backbone of a lot of this stuff as well. So really making sure that your content is as engaging, informative and shareable as possible, promotes your campaign's key messages and inspires people to take action. And I'll come to the positive tone bit in a second, but it's thinking about where you can add value for audiences. So like that informative piece is really key. So first of all, kind of like, I'll just go through each of those. So first of all, like engaging, right? So thinking about people scrolling on their social media feeds, right? You want to be able to kind of like stand out and grab their attention. Okay, so how best to do that? So that's kind of like having visual content, that is going to stand out in their feeds. But then also, what also engages people is when that they can take something from it, when they can learn something or something interesting, and so having that value added piece, I think, is really, really important as well. And then also kind of like shareable. So I'll give an example, and we'll see this later. But so during the marriage equality referendum in 2015, key objective for us was trying to get as many younger people on the register so that they would be able to vote in the referendum that upcoming May. So we were creating a lot of content for our social media, with this objective in mind. So infographics, strong visual infographics that outline the process of how to register to vote. Okay, so it's engaging, it's informative, because it's kind of letting people know the steps involved in the process, but also it's shareable as well. So if I'm thinking, okay, this mightn't be directly relevant to me, but some people within my network might be on the register, so therefore I'm going to share this out, and therefore it reaches kind of like wider audiences as well. So, and again, it's difficult to always achieve this, but again, trying to have that in your mind when you're kind of creating content around kind of like campaigns and activities, just it makes that it's engaging, informative, shareable, and adds value to the conversation. And I think then just on the positive tone piece, when we're kind of campaigning and communicating on issues around progressive social change, often we are trying to appeal to kind of like new audiences as well, so, and I think that those new audiences, it's the positive kind of like messaging and tone that really kind of like creates that space that they feel like that they can engage in that as well. So it's just making sure that that we are kind of like creating that space where people feel like that they can get involved, because often on these issues it can become kind of like divisive or polarizing, and I think it's just about trying to create space in the middle for people, and I think that is done when we are kind of like positive in our tone and in our messaging. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we're looking at the case studies as well. So engaging audiences then as well, I think this is linked kind of more specifically to that piece around kind of like inspiring action. And we have all of our really great content now, and we know the audiences that we're trying to target and what platforms we want to be on, but how do we actually convert all that engagement into action? Okay, and I think that this is about making it as easy as possible for people to participate and to show their support. And you might have even heard of like kind of funnels or channels of engagement before as well as part of your work, but like how does that relate to digital and to social media? And I think that's about having as many kind of like calls to action as possible, like in our social media posts. So depending on what the campaign or what the initiative or the activity is, but can you include a call to action at the end of the post which outlines what action you want people to do and where they need to go and do that. And then providing, again, different ways that people can get involved. So it might be so that you just want people to sign up to your mailing list, so that they can kind of be kept updated and informed of the work and the activities and the events that you're hosting. Or it might be then that you have a virtual event or a virtual meeting now, that everything is kind of virtual at the moment, but so it might be kind of trying to encourage signups or participation in those events. So that would be your call to action. But I think it's really important to be clear and explicit. Here's what you want, here's what we want you to do, here's how you go and do it. Okay. So thinking about like, you know, if you do create like a very kind of strong short video that does really well on social media and it's getting a lot of engagement, if you don't have, say, like a call to action kind of like in there, you know, you're potentially kind of just missing out on an opportunity where you can actually get people more involved in your campaign and with your message. Okay, and look, you're not always going to have it, but where you can kind of like bring that in. So it might be just even like find out more on our website, or, you know, as I said, sign up to our mailing list, but just trying to identify those opportunities. So if I come across this video in my social media feed and I haven't seen something from Youthrise before, but like I'm engaged, I'm interested, I want to find out more, make it easy for people that they know where they can go to do that, because people are less inclined to kind of like go searching themselves afterwards. Okay. And then also listening to the conversation, interacting with your audience. I'll just take those 2 points together. This is really important as well. And it is, I suppose, another layer of how we use kind of like social media. And this is around kind of like social listening. But like, you know, often is the case that a lot of these conversations around the issues and the work that we're involved in, they are taking place, and they are taking place on social media as well. So I think, you know, we have a real opportunity where to try and identify where these conversations are taking place and who's talking about them, and get involved in the conversation, provide that value, you know, and let people know the work that we're doing and how that they can support that as well. I think that that's really, really important. And when we're at a later stage, when we're looking at kind of like tools to help us with a lot of this work, I'll show you kind of like how I go about and do that. But I think that that's kind of like a real kind of like trick that maybe a lot of people and kind of like campaigners are not necessarily aware of how to use that to try and actually proactively reach and get involved in conversations with new audiences and bring them in. And then finally, so the last kind of like stage in this process as well. So what does success look like? You know, and I think it's really important that we are able to kind of like set goals and set targets that kind of like keep us on track. I think one of the biggest benefits, I think, of social media is the ability to measure everything that we are doing. You know, so if you took out like an ad in a local newspaper, you know, you don't necessarily know how many people have seen that ad, but if you put up a video on Facebook, for example, you know, how many people it reached, like how long they watched for, like when they started to drop off, you know, those types of insights are really useful and will kind of like help to guide our future work as well. There's a whole lot of stuff that we can learn from that as well, you know, but I think it's really important as well to identify, as I say here, what's meaningful engagements from your campaign. So I think for many years there, you know, and still we see it a lot where you're reporting on what can be called like vanity metrics, kind of, you know, so like reach and impressions or the number of likes. And while they are important, I think we need to be able to kind of like drill down further into that. And can we actually kind of set goals and targets related to our aims and our objectives, right? So if we just take an example, so say if it was around kind of like the mailing list and we were just trying to grow that a bit, you know, just for argument's sake. So we might kind of like set a target around that. So, you know, by the end of the summer, we want to increase, you know, our sign-up rate by like, you know, 5% or whatever. And then as part of that, you can set goals kind of like for your social media posts where you can measure the numbers of clicks through from your social media posts over to your newsletter sign-up page. Okay, so and then what does that look like? So that's kind of a little bit more meaningful, and it is linked to your aims and your objectives. Similarly, if you were like, you know, a video is one of the kind of like the best ways of communicating with audiences on social media. So if you were kind of creating a couple of pieces of video around a campaign, you know, so yeah, you might report on kind of like the overall reach, but certainly you'd want to be looking at kind of like retention rates around that as well. So, you know, how long do people watch for? So if you put up, say, like a 5-minute video, but 90% of your audiences only watched for the first minute, that's, that, like, they're not really getting the full kind of message there. So that's, I would say that's not a meaningful engagement. But if you're able to set goals, like say, okay, well, we want at least kind of like 50% to have watched at least 75% of the videos, and then if you can kind of like report on that, I think that's really, really useful. And then also learn from it as well. So you might see, okay, well, yeah, we had a shorter video and we had a longer video, and we feel that like when we do put out the shorter one, our retention rates are much longer, rather than the longer video piece as well. So just being able to kind of like learn from that as well, I think is really, really important. So setting the goals, monitoring your progress, so checking in, like every 2 weeks, every month, looking back at your analytics as well, what's working well, and what's not, doing more of what is, or maybe tweaking what's not as well. So you might find, yeah, when we are posting videos, we're getting a lot more engagements, therefore we might want to do more of that, as opposed to, you might be sharing a lot of media articles, but you're finding that doesn't actually, that doesn't result in many engagements. So you might look at how you do that a little bit differently. And as I was floating through the breakout rooms there, I heard somebody kind of like mention the Facebook algorithm as well, and that is difficult, because I suppose it is always kind of like changing. But I suppose what the one constant thing with the Facebook algorithm is that, like, if you're consistently posting content that is getting good engagement, Facebook's algorithm will say, oh yeah, like, so whenever this page puts out this type of content, people tend to like it, therefore I'm going to push it higher up in people's feeds. Okay, and then on the flip side, if you're putting out stuff that's kind of consistently not getting good engagement, Facebook will say, okay, well, when this page is putting out this stuff, their audience don't really respond to it that well, therefore I'm going to push it further down in people's feeds as well. Okay, so I think that's another reason why it's really important to be consistently monitoring and measuring our performance as well, and taking the learnings from that. Okay, so we'll take a break now in about 5 minutes, but just moving into kind of like thinking about how we actually like implement some of this stuff as well. So as I mentioned, kind of like the content piece is super important, and for a lot of this work as well. Primarily video. So it just performs way above and beyond kind of like any other content type. And within that, I think there's still a couple of things to be kind of like aware of as well. So audiences' attention spans on social media are ever decreasing as well. So it's a case of tends to be the shorter, the better as well, but without compromising obviously on our message as well. But, so kind of like short form videos, anywhere from like 30 to 90 seconds max is generally considered like the optimum time. And then also thinking like the vast majority of video on social media is watched without sound as well. So if you do kind of like, if you have, see, people speaking to camera, that you're adding captions, you're adding subtitles, or, you might look at kind of like short form animation with kind of like text overlays as a way of communicating your message. Those types of communications, that type of content tends to work well and really kind of like helps to engage audiences. And then social media advertising, which I kind of like mentioned a while ago, I think it can be really, really like effective when it's used kind of like strategically as well. And what I will say as well, like, it often doesn't require a huge amount of spend as well in order for it to be effective. Where it can be useful, I think, is helping to give your content a bit of a boost. So whilst organic reach on social media is a lot more difficult these days, so like a couple of years ago, it was much easier to reach kind of like thousands and thousands of people organically, it's just not the same anymore. And that's because like the business model of a lot of the platforms has changed, you know, and they're saying, well, if you want to reach thousands and thousands of people, you need to kind of like pay for that. But that's not to say that like organic reach is dead and gone. But where I think small amounts of advertising can be useful is to help give it a little bit of a boost at the start. And that's when, because it drives it up in people's feeds and gets you in front of new audiences based on your targeting. And then that's when, if it's good content, if it's engaging, that's when organic will take over. People will comment, they'll share, and it'll start to spread out wider into other people's feeds. But it's about kind of like giving it that initial boost. You know, so I would kind of advise using that kind of strategically around if any kind of like key campaigns that you're running, or say you do put like resourcing behind kind of creating a strong video or piece of visual communications for your campaign, that, you know, you don't want to kind of put all of this effort and resources into creating something and then for it to kind of fall a bit flat. But can you give that a little bit of a boost and help it to kind of spread further as well? So where can you use social media advertising in effective ways and to reach new audiences as well based on that targeting? And also planning, really, really important as well, you know, so trying to really think about, you know, so as you're planning kind of campaigns and activities, anything that's coming up over like the next while, thinking at that stage, okay, well, what do we want this to look like on digital and social media? You know, what content do we need in order to be able to really promote and amplify this? You know, and then again, trying to put together content calendars for that, proactively scheduling content so that when you're kind of pushing content out, you're in the middle of the campaign, then you have the time to be able to go in and monitor your progress, see how you're doing, and also identify those conversations that people are having on the issues you're working on, and trying to take your message and your communications to those audiences as well. You know, and I think that is achieved by having those kind of robust plans in place. Okay, so with that, we'll just kind of like come to the end of this section. So I'm more than happy to take any questions that people might have at this stage before we take a bit of a break. So if anyone has any questions, either put it into the chat box, or also you can, more than happy for you to just take yourself off mute and ask your question as well.
Hi, Craig.
Hi.
I just want to check on something. You mentioned on issues around how can we make sure that we constantly plan when it comes to content creation and how people can then engage on our posts on our social media. But I just want to know on how best can we ensure that maybe in times of disasters or maybe pandemics, we keep people engaged on our posts, because what I've also observed on other platforms is that since February or March, the number of people who have been much active on social media has kind of dropped. And now we are looking at it as one of the platforms where people can access information, and that is how we can engage with people as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second question is, how best can we amplify messages? My understanding for other organizations is that people, they do not easily get resources for maybe paid posts. They rely on organic posts where we are looking at the posts as they are without any paid ad on it. How can we ensure that the text or the content is well created in a way which is engaging and also speaking directly to people?
Yeah, okay, cool.
Over.
Two very good questions there. So just on the first one, so I suppose I'll speak maybe in the context of the global pandemic that we're kind of in the middle of. You know, and I suppose even, you know, myself and the work that I'm involved in, this is something that I've kind of had to adjust to as well, you know. And I think it's about trying to identify just kind of like where and when it makes most sense for you to be still kind of like talking about these issues, you know, in ways that are going to kind of like engage people. So I think it might be a time where you are looking at your, say, your current supporters, and, you know, even just kind of like mobilizing them, letting them know about, say, what's coming up. But also I think what I'm learning for myself is that this can be an important time to plan ahead, you know, because at the moment kind of like people are very kind of like, say, focused on all things COVID, and issues related to that, you know. But as we start to kind of like emerge or are in the kind of later stages of this, I think people will be looking for kind of like other messages of optimism and hope for other kind of like campaigns and communities as well. So how can we use this time to best kind of like plan for that? So when people do start to, say, re-engage a little bit, that we're able to kind of like take advantage of that time and that opportunity to engage new people, because I do think that there is a difficulty if we're not able to kind of connect our work to the issues that people are concerned with at the moment. I think it's really difficult to try and engage kind of like new people at the moment, just with everything that's going on, and even having cut through. So if you're finding that that is the case, I'd be like, you know, just trying to keep it consistent, trying to think of the supporters that you do have, and having something for them. But I think primarily using the time to think, re-strategize, plan for when we are kind of like in those other phases, when we start to move out and people are starting to switch on a little bit, and being able to kind of like hit go at that stage and have kind of strong content, strong communications for that. So hopefully that makes sense. But as I said, like, it's something that I've also been kind of like dealing with and adjusting with as well. But I do think that there will be an appetite in those kind of like later stages, and people will be looking for kind of like optimism and hope, and also almost, I think, something else to kind of to focus on as well. So then in relation to your second question, yeah, so if you are relying on, say, on primarily organic posts, it is going back to that piece there on just making sure that it's kind of like engaging, informative and shareable. So like, say if you're like attending a virtual training or a virtual event like this, or you're hosting something, so it's like, so rather than saying, say, it was great to be at this event or whatever, it's actually, what did you learn? Here are the 3 key takeaways from this event. Okay, so you're giving audiences who are not there a sense of what happened and what you learned and what you took from it. And so it's providing a little bit more value, if that makes sense, you know, and then just trying to apply that in other scenarios as well, you know. So here's something you can learn, or yeah, where can you kind of provide a little bit more than simply just kind of more static communications. So making sure it's engaging, informative, adds value, and then including those calls to action as well, I think is really important. Something else that I will kind of just mention in relation to that, and Facebook specifically. So not only kind of are the platforms themselves changing, you know, and we mentioned the introduction, say, of TikTok, but like how audiences consume content on the platforms and use them, like that kind of is changing a lot as well. So obviously it was started off with Snapchat, but now on Instagram, like, you know, the rise of stories. So like that's kind of like really, really popular way of communicating and engaging online at the moment. That's called ephemeral content, you know, so it doesn't last that long on social media. It disappears afterwards. And that's the way that social media is kind of going. So it's with the exception of say Twitter, but it's kind of, it's moving away from this broadcast kind of, you know, on Facebook, we probably all have photos from 10 years ago or more that we wish were no longer there, you know, are things that you used to post on people's kind of like walls. It's moving away from that, and it's moving to more kind of smaller private conversations. So the likes of the Instagram stories, but on Facebook, you know, Facebook groups, they're really kind of like kind of popular at the moment as well. And I think that's as a result of say all of the criticisms that Facebook has been at the receiving end of with fake news and everything. So they're moving away from, say, a news feed, and they're trying to facilitate what they call meaningful connections. And I think that we're seeing that manifest through Facebook groups. So I even noticed it myself, you know, I'm moving away from Facebook a good bit, but when I do go onto Facebook, any groups that I'm a member of, they tend to be at the top of my newsfeed these days. So it's a case of like, as even, you know, individuals, can you go in, like identifying groups related to issues that we're kind of campaigning on and posting in there. I think that's a really good organic way of trying to find new audiences is through groups. And then outside of that, yeah, it's again just thinking of the engaging content and keeping an eye on the analytics, you know, because if you're consistently getting good engagement, the algorithm will favor that. But if you're not, the algorithm won't, and they'll downrank you in people's feeds. Hopefully that answers it for you. Any other questions? Okay, so if we're happy enough then at this stage, we'll take a 10-minute break. Something's coming into the, yeah, so we'll take a 10-minute break. So it's 22 the hour here at the moment. So yeah, we'll come back at 10 to the hour. And then we'll have about 40 minutes then where we'll just do a quick case study of the equality referendum before we wrap for today. Okay, 10 minutes, thank you. There we go. So recording again. Yeah, so I just wanted to give you a bit of a case study on the referendum, what that looked like. And I suppose my involvement with the campaign and certainly around kind of the digital and the social media aspect has influenced much of the work that I'm doing now, and especially around the work on progressive drug policy with the Analyse and the Safe from Harm campaign as well. So, you know, hopefully we'll kind of see elements coming through from this, but then also when we talk more specifically about the Safe from Harm campaign in the session tomorrow as well. So essentially with the referendum campaign, yeah, we had been kind of like working on this obviously for a number of years leading up to the referendum, you know, but more specifically since in 2013, we knew at that stage that there was going to be a public vote on the issue. So in 2013, we started working on what that referendum campaign would look like. And during that time, we done a lot of research, so which identified to us that we had a core 20%, say, supporter base. You know, they were voting yes no argument was going to change their mind. So we had their support locked in. Then say on the flip side, there was a 20% core, say, no vote. They were voting no yes argument was going to change their mind. And we made a clear kind of like decision at the outset that we weren't going to try and engage or influence this audience at all. We were just going to leave them to one side, because that would have just been wasted effort and energy, and because we weren't going to change their mind. And I suppose we were very focused then on that group in the middle. So that's 60% in what we call the movable middle. So they were, say, soft yeses or soft nos. They had kind of some questions or some concerns, and really they were, depending on which way they went, they were going to determine the outcome of the campaign. So we were very much kind of focused on trying to get as many of them in that mover middle over to our side. You know, so that was they were like our primary target audience. But then at the same time, you know, we didn't want to lose sight of this really important kind of core 20% support base as well, you know. So we wanted to mobilize and motivate them, empower and encourage them to become part of the campaign as well, so that they had the language, the confidence, to be able to speak to their friends, their families, their communities about why they were involved, why they were voting yes, and why they thought it was important that they did so too. So they were very much kind of like our key target audiences, and that was kind of like the overall aim of the campaign. So how did we kind of like go about and do this then? So Govinda's just trying to come back in there. So so this was the framing behind the campaign then was, I suppose it was, we were presenting this as a moment, as an opportunity to treat all of our citizens as equals in front of the eyes of our constitution. So it was one very much of constitutional equality, you know. And we were also coming up on the 100th year anniversary of the Irish Republic, you know, so it was very much kind of like buying into that as well, you know, and you know, how this is our moment, this was our time, but very much kind of rooted, I think, within that overarching frame was the value-based campaign. You know, it was very much kind of like rooted in values, you know. So we were kind of saying to people, you know, as Irish people, we're very fair and decent and generous, and the fair, the decent and generous thing to do is to vote yes on the 22nd of May, you know. And that's, so that image there is of our first billboard campaigns that says loving, equal, fair, generous and inclusive. There are many words to describe Ireland today. On the 22nd of May, we need only one yes. So this was very much kind of like the focus of the campaign, was appealing to people's values. And you know, and I think on reflection, like that, we were certainly successful in that. And you know, and a lot of people have remarked on that as well, that this became more than just, say, a referendum or a vote on gay marriage, but it was on the type of people we are, the type of country we want to live in, the type of society we want to be a part of. And I think that that was achieved through this value-based campaigning, you know. And then within that, the tone is really, really important as well. So creating and maintaining that positive tone throughout was going to be really, really important and really crucial, because, you know, and so easy kind of with social issue campaigns specifically, you know, you are going to have opposition, and we did have a very vocal, strong opposition during that campaign. And so, you do see a lot of division in those campaigns and mudslinging back and forth. And I think, you know, when that happens, you do lose out on opportunities to engage those people in the middle, you know, because they get very turned off by this kind of division and by this mudslinging. So it's about kind of creating that space where they feel that they can ask questions, voice those concerns, but it was our job then to answer them, you know. We didn't want to be kind of saying to people like, you know, if you're not voting yes, you know, you're a homophobe. Like, that wasn't it. It was trying to meet people where they're at. You know, what questions did they have? You know, what are your concerns? Let's address them, and then you'll vote yes, you know. So that's kind of what it was about. And then also, like, the messages. So, like, what were we saying to people? And also, I think equally as important, if not more important as well, is like, who are the messengers? So who are sending these messages kind of like on behalf of us and the campaign? And just actually something I wanted to say on that values piece as well, like, that is very dependent on the country that you're operating in, and kind of like the values that people kind of hold dear in those countries, and that I think that does really have an impact and an influence on this whole process. You know, because I remember we had people from the US who came over to Ireland when we were in the planning stages of the campaign, you know, and they like, so they had a lot of votes in different US states on marriage equality. You know, so they were kind of like they were bringing the learnings kind of like from that over to us. And their whole thing is about, you know, love, and like love wins, and that kind of messaging really works in the US for those audiences. But when we tested that type of messaging in Ireland, it was like, go away with that fluffy love stuff, you know, and that really didn't kind of like work for audiences here as well. It was more around kind of like the fairness and the decency. So that's why it's really important to think, well, what's going to actually work for people in your in your area, like in your town, city, village as well as your country as well, you know, because often it is very specific. So what did the campaign look like then? Sorry. Oh. It's going a bit slow for me. Okay, sorry. So yeah, like, when we started off the campaign, we started in November 2014. So that was 8 months before the day of the vote itself. And as I mentioned, a key priority for us was trying to get as many new people registered to vote as possible, you know, so big registration drives. So when we kicked off in November 2014, as like the name of the campaign, the main campaigning organization that I worked for was Yes Equality. So we kicked off with the name and the brand in November 2014 with a register to vote campaign. And at that time, you know, we tried to get as many kind of high profile and celeb type people involved to try and get the message out there in those early stages. And it was as simple as we had a pack, and we sent out to people this sheet and just asked them to print off this page. It said, "I'm ready to vote." And we asked them to just share that on their social media. But what I noticed in those early stages was like that actually worked quite well. So when bigger names like Colin Farrell, Darrow Breen, and like high profile Irish people, when they did this, it translated into coverage in the national media as well. So it just helps to really break outside of that bubble in the early stages. But from the analytics, like I could notice, I was like, out of all the content we were sharing, this type of stuff was working quite well. So I was thinking, okay, well, how do we kind of use and adapt this as part of the campaign moving forward? You know, and as we got closer and closer to the day of the vote itself, like, you know, people, when they were doing radio or TV debates, they were being asked, you know, how are you voting in May, you know, on the marriage equality referendum? So whenever there was kind of like positive endorsements from people, we would take the quote and then, you know, create graphics like this that we would push out on social media. And this became like our best performing content over the course of the campaign, you know. And that's something that we learned in those early phases from the analytics, seeing, yeah, this type of stuff, people are really liking this. So how do we evolve this and do more of it? And then even like, you know, again, just that point of the messengers being super important. So many of you won't be aware of who this guy on the left of your screen, Daniel O'Donnell. So he's like a country singer based in the kind of the northwest of Ireland, but he's like loved and adored by like middle-aged older women. And he's going to be able to speak to those audiences in ways that we're never going to be able to. So that's why it was kind of really important to try to have these voices. And this is the type of content that had impact on social media as well, because it's that kind of little bit of an unexpected voice as well, you know. And we also try to bring in humor there. So that's Mrs. Brown. So has a sitcom called Mrs. Brown's Boys, which the BBC voted as like sitcom of the decade or century or something mad like that. But again, has huge reach as well. So just trying to bring in those voices. But it's also really important that like it's not just about the high profile and the celeb type names either. It's also about everyday people in their communities, in their towns, their villages, talking to people like them as well, you know. And very much the focus of our campaign was to create that kind of space for people to be able to tell their stories about why they were voting yes. So this example at the top of your screen there is a couple called Bridget and Paddy. So they live in Louth, which is north of our capital city, Dublin, and it's near the border of our Ireland and Northern Ireland. And so they made a video as part of the campaign. And it's shot in their home. So their son is helping them create this video, which they then uploaded to YouTube. And like, it was an example of that type of content that just went viral. And I think for a lot of different reasons, but it's really lovely messaging. They're talking about the love that they've experienced over like the last 50 years, and they want the same for their kids. They talked about, you know, being involved in the civil rights struggle in the north of Ireland, and now it's time to do the same in the south. They talked about being like, you know, religious and practicing Catholics, but, you know, they know that their ever-loving God knows that this is the right thing to do. You know, so it was just kind of like hitting on so many important messages so that people who like them, you know, can say, okay, you know, they're religious and they're still thinking that this is okay. Maybe it's okay for me to do so too, you know. So I think it really was so powerful in kind of winning hearts and minds and capturing the imagination of the Irish kind of voting public. So yeah, and like this example from Bridget and Paddy was just one of a number. So for people from all walks of life, from all parts of the country, telling their stories about why they were voting yes as well. So really, really important. And that personal storytelling just works so well. You know, definitely in the kind of the values-based messaging, but also in that kind of like authentic and compelling kind of communications as well. Another example that people remember a lot is like for the Ring Your Granny campaign. So this was started from a group of students in Trinity College in Dublin. So there was a perception that older people, you know, were more conservative and religious and therefore less likely to vote yes. So these students made a video of them calling up their grandparents and asking them how they were going to vote. And again, it's just really lovely because these young people are, I suppose they're nervous and they're apprehensive to have these conversations because they don't know like how their grandparents are going to react or how they're going to vote. But then, you know, it just flips because all of their loved ones are like, of course I'm voting yes. This is about you. This is about future generations. And it's just really, really lovely. But what I think that is the power of this is that, you know, it conveyed to people that, yes, we can have these conversations. You know, they might be difficult at the start, but it's important to have these conversations with our loved ones. And I think, you know, when we're talking about how do we inspire people to take action, I think that the Ring Your Granny is a perfect example of that. You know, so this is, again, a video that went viral on social media, but it inspired so many people to have those conversations with their loved ones. And they didn't need to make videos and post them on social media, but it was just about actually starting the conversation, you know? So I think that that's where that had real kind of impact and power. But it also did, like, people did record their own videos of those conversations and upload them as well. So it started a little bit of had a bit of a knock-on effect. I actually, so for those of you joining us from Australia, I'm not sure if you remember this, but like, so I went down to Australia in 2017 to work on their marriage equality campaign. So when they became the second country in the world they had a sort of a vote on it, and then it was brought in by legislation. But we actually took this idea and used it in the Australian campaign as well. So, but instead of ring your granny, it was hashtag ring your relos, which is their kind of slang for relatives. But again, it worked so well in that campaign as well to really kind of like reach and engage audiences and get that message across. And again, like winning hearts and minds is what we're ultimately trying to do. So just other examples of, I suppose, social media content that worked really well for us. And then again, trying to illustrate some of what we talked about in the earlier session. So that kind of really informative, engaging, shareable content. So I gave that example of like the register to vote piece. So that's the type of infographics that we were creating and sharing for that. So, you know, here's how you go and do it. And again, you know, people are going to share this amongst their networks to try and get as many people added to the register. And this is clearly linked to one of our aims and one of our objectives. Also, so the other example there is there was a concern that because younger people were so in support of it, and you know they're not known for being great at turning out to vote, there was a risk that there was going to be complacency amongst kind of like younger audiences as well. So we were trying to replace that sense of kind of complacency with a sense of urgency and saying to young people like, no, this is not a done deal. Like, you know, we need every single kind of like vote. So that urgency, especially in the kind of the days and weeks leading up to the vote, that kind of tended to work quite well to really mobilize and motivate people as well. And then also like turning the negative into a positive as well, where you can do this, I think can be very kind of beneficial for the work that we do. And this is about kind of being reactive and taking advantage of the opportunities that we are presented. So in the context of the campaign, so in Ireland during political campaigns, posters go up on lampposts right across the country. And this was no different. But the no posters actually started going up a good kind of like week to 10 days before the yes posters. And the yes supporters were, you know, questioning and frustrated. They were like, where are the yes posters? And they were frustrated by the language in the no posters. And we were getting bombarded with questions and messages, being like, wow, like what's going on? Where are the posters? So we were like, okay, how do we kind of like harness this opportunity? You know, and we were like, let's use this for fundraising, because, you know, we needed more funds to create like more posters around the country. So we said to people like, you know, posters are expensive, like we need money for them. So it's like putting out messages across kind of social media saying, don't get angry, don't get frustrated, donate to the campaign, donate to the campaign. And like funneling kind of people in that direction. And in the first kind of like 36 hours after the no posters went up and we started pushing out this messaging, we saw a large kind of like spike in donations to allow us to put up more posters as well. So it's really kind of like trying to take advantage of that. Or, you know, on social media, like, you know, I'm fully aware it can be a bit of a cesspit at times as well, and it can be very kind of like a negative. And we found during the referendum campaign, it tended to be during kind of like television or radio debates that it would become very heightened on social media. So it was again about peppering social media at that time, saying to people, you know, don't get angry, don't get frustrated, join your local Yes Equality group, like, you know, get involved, go canvassing, volunteer. So it's trying to actually harness that and direct it into a positive way that was going to benefit us for the campaign. Yeah, so, and I mentioned, you know, yeah, primarily we were using this as a communications tool, but we also wanted to use it to really to mobilize and organize our supporters across the country. And I think we also managed to do that quite effectively. So Yes Equality as a campaigning group, we try to see ourselves maybe as like a little bit of a pop-up political party. Like we wanted to have like one Yes Equality group in each county. So that would have been 26 Yes Equality groups. I remember at the outset thinking, that's a bit optimistic. I was like, we'll be doing very well if we get a local group in each county. But we actually grew to like a network of over 60 different groups. So like local Yes Equality groups in all like different, say, Dublin areas, in small towns and villages right across the country. And so, you know, whilst we did have, say, activists and supporters who were starting a lot of these groups around the country, a lot of them also like were popping up, or, you know, they were manifesting through kind of like social media. So Yes Equality Cork, starting a Facebook group or a Facebook page, people joining that way, and then them calling a meeting around that, you know, and that's how a lot of these groups kind of got going and got off the ground. And then they also kept up an active presence on social media throughout the campaign as well. So here, this is an example from Yes Equality Cork. They would put out a schedule every week of where and when they were going canvassing, and asking people to get involved. So back to that piece we said earlier about, like, you know, making it as easy as possible for people to show their support, how they do that. So here, you know, this is like, okay, if I want to go canvassing, I need to go to this place at this time and just rock up and join in. And that's how we got these massive numbers of people canvassing every evening. And it was the canvassing, it was the knocking on people's doors right across the country, asking people to vote yes. You know, that's what really won it. But I think, like, definitely social media was used to help to drive that action, you know. So it's not a one or the other, but this was just a tool that helped to really to drive that. Also, like, you know, WhatsApp groups, things like that, to really like keep people updated and informed, communicating and organizing locally all of the time. And then I think, like, you know, crowdsourcing as well. This can be really useful for a lot of the work that we're doing. So, you know, like, there's a lot of research done around, say, giving, and like around kind of millennial giving specifically. You know, so people they more kind of like want to utilize their skills to assist kind of like, you know, campaigns and causes. So less likely to, say, you know, go out and shake buckets, but like, how can they you give their time and give their skills in a way that's going to benefit these causes the most. So we were seeing a lot of kind of like goodwill during the campaign of creative people sending us in kind of like visuals that they had created. So we're like, okay, how can we use this, you know, and in a way of kind of like giving back as well. So when it came to the last few weeks of the campaign, you know, our efforts completely shifted from trying to educate and inform to just really mobilizing that vote and everything around getting the vote out. And like, there's research done that shows that, you know, you're more likely to vote if you make a plan to vote. So we put out a call on social media, just like asking for people to help us like create content for social media around like this idea of making a plan to vote. And here's just an example of some of those graphics that we got back in that we could then push out on our social media, you know. So are there ways, like, even within your, say, kind of core network of supporters, are there kind of like ways that you can utilize kind of like those skills that people have that are going to benefit the work that you're doing? I think that can be really, really important as well. Okay, that was a very kind of quick overview of the S Equality campaign. Does anybody have any kind of questions related to that? So anything that I've covered or that I didn't cover that you would like to ask, please feel free to do so. Yes?
Yeah, thank you so much for this, Craig. I guess a question that I had, especially concerning like when you talked a little bit about groups forming at the more local level and those initiatives being sort of volunteer-led. How did you deal from the sort of like headquarters of the campaign or the central hub of the campaign with like conflicting messages? How did you ensure that there was some coherence with having so many actors involved?
Yeah, really good question. And that was a really kind of key concern for us as well, you know, or like something that we definitely wanted to mitigate against as best we could, kind of like from the start. So yeah, in a way, it was great that these were all popping up, but the more that were popping up, the more we're like, oh God, you know, we need to try and have some control. But then also it was kind of like trying to have some control, but also letting it happen as well, because you know, I think what we saw our role in HQ being to kind of like facilitate all of this local action, because it was people down in Cork and Galway and all parts of Ireland, like, you know, they know best how to speak to people and campaign in their area. So our role was about trying to just provide that kind of strategic leadership and resources as it was required, you know. So how we went and done that, like, what we try to do is have a point person, a clearly identified point person in each of those groups, and we had a channel of communication with those people. So when, you know, whatever the kind of the objectives or the key messages for that week were, we could communicate to those people, and then they would communicate those to their audiences, their networks. But also, you know, we had those kind of people sign a protocol that would say, you know, that they would stay kind of like in line with the messaging, things like that. You know, we provided them with all of like the assets that they needed for their social media. So, you know, even like down to like area specific branding, just to make sure that all of the branding was cohesive and in line. And, you know, we sent in the last few weeks, it was even as far as like we had daily messaging books that went out, and that had suggested tweets and things like that that people could then push out. Where the difficulty kind of came in, I suppose, was trying to monitor the output and just making sure that everyone was kind of staying in line. So I used for Twitter specifically, I used a tool called like TweetDeck, which will show you kind of, you might have some experience with that. But like I just added all of the different groups to a list, and I had a column in my TweetDeck where I was just trying to monitor as much as possible. But like, it's also really hard. You can't do that all of the time. But what we were able to do and how it worked best was letting it up to the community to monitor that actually. And, you know, so if one group noticed something that they had a concern over, they would come to us and say, hey, maybe you just might want to take a look at this. And then we were able to kind of monitor it. And if we needed to interject, we would do so then. But it was actually just kind of like relying on the different groups to let us know what was going on. And by and large, like it worked, that did work well, you know. But so I think it's having, like, being able to give them the resources, the tools. We had guidelines, but giving them suggested messaging, all of that, you know, and that really helped, because you know, it was literally just a case of them taking it and running with it. So providing that leadership, but also empowering them to say, you know best how to kind of go and do this.
Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, Ailish?
Hi, Craig. I had a question about like, how did you have any tactic to counterbalance some of the sort of very negative no side rhetoric? Because like, it was obviously there there was a lot of really terrible language being used, and the posters they were putting up were really yeah, just like blatant homophobia basically. And I mean, in drug policy circles, there's also a very strong and vocal and stigmatizing other side to this. So I was wondering if you had any tactics for, yeah, counteracting that without also like kind of stooping to their level, if you will.
Yeah. And I think that that latter point that you made is actually like the more important one. And it's not that it's kind of like stooping to their level, but it's more kind of like giving them the ammunition that they're looking for, you know. And certainly like with the no side, like they were trying to goad us and bring and you know, bring us into a place where we were kind of like fighting with them, you know, so that they could then use it. I'll use an example again from when the posters started going up, for example. People did start kind of like tearing down the no posters, and then they were posting pictures of themselves with the posters in social media. And the no side actually tried to use this as an opportunity to say that we were advocating for this, you know, that we were advocating for people to kind of take down the posters. So we had to come out very swiftly on social media and say, no, of course, like we don't advocate for this at all, you know, like, and you know, we like, again, we need posters, help us to do that. So, and then that's just kind of like that example. But I think, like you can still do fact checking, you know. And I found kind of like in the later stages, it was actually like it was a piece of media that was done. So like on RTE, which is our like say a national broadcaster, they did this series with say an independent person where they put all of these kind of like red herrings and arguments that were coming from the no side. They put all of these kind of like questions to this independent, it was like a high court judge. And then that person came out and kind of debunked everything. And when we could take that kind of like independent perspective and amplify it, like I remember that having kind of like real impact, because it wasn't like just us saying it. It was like, here's this independent person who's debunking all of this stuff that's coming from the other side. And that had real kind of credibility to it. So I think that where you're able to kind of say amplify those kind of those voices is also really important. But don't engage and don't respond. But it's almost like you're just kind of like promoting this kind of like independent information. So hopefully that kind of answers that question for you. But it is difficult, you know, and it can be draining as well when you are seeing all of this, yeah, like distractions and red herrings and vitriolic kind of like language as well. Trying to kind of keep focused can be difficult, but just trying to remember, like, you know, that strategy does work, you know, and don't kind of like give in to them trying to drag you, the opposition trying to drag you in.
That's perfect. Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions? Okay, so yeah, look, hopefully you found that interesting and useful, and the overall session this afternoon as well. So yeah, as I mentioned, today was very much kind of just trying to introduce the topic and to guide our thinking, you know, especially for the next two sessions. So for just some thinking in advance of tomorrow. Hopefully most of you are able to, or all of you are able to join us for the session tomorrow, but there is going to be a bit more of a practical focus on that session. So it's taking these kind of like 7 areas or 7 questions that we looked at earlier and trying to think about applying those to our own work as well, you know. So if you can just start thinking about those, how it relates to the work that we're doing, and then we'll work in groups tomorrow to try and tease this out a little bit more. So we'll start off. I'll just talk a little bit about kind of like the work that I've been doing with Analyse and the Safer from Harm campaign. So about progressive drug policy in Ireland, and then we'll move into the group work and trying to flesh out these questions a little bit more. Okay, so with that then, yeah, we'll draw today's session to a close. Thank you very much for your attention this afternoon or this evening or this morning, wherever you are. Yeah, and we'll pick up again tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you very much, Craig. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
See you
Thank
tomorrow.
Thanks, Craig.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, guys. Bye for now.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye, guys.